Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining codeHER for our Young Women's Leadership Series. Today, in our fourth part, we are discussing young women's independence for women around the world and how young women that come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds can tackle social and economic pressures that they face in their communities. We're delighted to have everyone attend this conference with us today. We have participants from Uganda to Zimbabwe to Uzbekistan, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Ethiopia, and all around the world. And we're delighted to have everyone attend from wherever you may be. My name is Saniya Vashist, and I'm the founder and executive of codeHER. We're an international nonprofit dedicated to empowering young women with tech and leadership skills. I founded codeHER when I was 13 years old, and now at 18, I'm currently taking a gap year before attending Stanford University in the fall. We're delighted to launch our Young Women's Leadership Series when the pandemic hit, especially noticing how it was disproportionately impacting young women around the world. We've run our three parts of our series thus far: our Women in Tech Conference, our Women's Economic Empowerment Conference, and our Women's Leadership Conference, and are excited to get started with our Women's Independence Conference with our amazing panelists here with us today. For our agenda, we're going to be, discussing our opening remarks, and then I'll be introducing both of our panelists, Fatima Zara Aboukir and Firth Marie. We're going to end with a Q&A before we go into breakout rooms at around 12 for our networking event with the codeHER team and the participants of our event today. I'd like to go ahead now and introduce our wonderful line of panelists today: leaders in the global development sectors, advocates of gender equality, and highly accomplished women from around the world. As I was saying, Firth Marie is a New Zealand-born activist, author, professor, and the founding president of a global nonprofit. In 1987, Ms. Marie founded the Global Fund for Women, an organization advocating and supporting the fight for gender justice around the world. She ran the organization until 1996. Anne previously led philanthropic efforts on population and environmental issues for the Hewlett Foundation from 1978 to 1987. Prior to that, she was a writer at the United Nations and an editor for Stanford, Oxford, and Yale University presses. In 2005, Anne was one of 1,000 women jointly nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Ms. Marie is the author of 2 books: Paradigm Found: Leading and Managing for Positive Change, and From Outrage to Courage: Women Taking Action for Health and Justice. She is currently a consulting professor at Stanford University and serves as an advisor and board member to several foundations and nonprofit organizations. And if you wouldn't mind, we would love for you to introduce yourself and say a few words about your background and your story.
Oh my goodness. You've done quite a job covering my background, so I'm not quite sure what I can add. But let me just say that, as you mentioned, I was born in New Zealand, and New Zealand was the first country in the world where women had the vote. And I think that my birth in New Zealand, my citizenship, I am a New Zealand citizen, has been an important factor in my life. It's a nice little country, an egalitarian country, and I've been influenced by that, I think. You mentioned my background. I'm old enough to be your great-grandmother, I think, so a lot has happened in those many years. But let me jump through and say I studied at Berkeley and New York University in economics and political science. My professional life, as you've covered, has been in the nonprofit world, and most recently founding the global and running the Global Fund for Women. And I think later in our program, I would like to mention briefly examples of women's groups that the Global Fund for Women has funded, has supported. Because I think one of the questions that may come up today is, what can we do about some of the difficult problems that women face pretty much in every country in the world? So I'd like to use a few examples of that. Most recently, as you mentioned, I've been teaching at Stanford University, and I've been enjoying my little grandchildren from their toddler stage to their grown-up stage. They're both pursuing PhDs at a couple of universities. What else can I say about myself? I think my interest in women's issues began way back when my brother was allowed to have a job delivering papers. And I told my mother, I was 4 years younger than my brother, but I said, I would like a job delivering papers. And my mother said, no, you can't. You're a girl. You can't do that. And I thought to myself, oh, that's right. I can't do that. I didn't stand up and object and advocate for change, but it had an effect on me and I thought it was unfair. I think from very, very early days, I've observed a certain amount of unfairness about being a woman, and I could bore you with a number of examples. So that probably was the very beginning of my interest in women's issues, and ultimately creating the Global Fund for Women, which has now become a worldwide, very successful organization, was a significant accomplishment. So I think that's enough to say about me. I could talk about my interest in beekeeping and reading and writing and that sort of thing, but enough already. Let's get on with our morning.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Anne. It was wonderful to hear your own perspective on your own story, and we're excited to learn more about your background and your past, endeavors in empowering women and your perspective on these issues. Next up, we have Fatima Zara Aboukir, the Youth Engagement Specialist at the U.S. Embassy in Rabat, Morocco. She has been leading the embassy's outreach to youth audiences for 9 years. She has previously served as the Corporate and Education Officer at the British Council. And Fatima Zara has a degree in Business and Management from the National School of Business and Management, Agadir. Since a young age, Fatima Zara has been an active civil society leader and supporter of gender equality initiatives. Fatima Zara has represented Morocco in many national and international events and programs. We're delighted to have you here with us today, Fatima Zara. Would you like to go ahead and say a few words?
Hello, yes, with pleasure. Thank you again for having me today. I'm very honored to have been invited to be part of this panel. As you mentioned, I'm currently working for the U.S. Embassy in Morocco, managing youth programs. Basically, my job is to design and implement youth empowerment programs. Going back to my childhood, I grew up in a very small town, almost a village in southern Morocco, where in a kind of place where you didn't really have many opportunities. There wasn't much going on except for school and going back home. But at that time, I felt like I had so much energy that I needed a channel where I can really express myself. Thankfully, there was a youth center that opened in my hometown when I was around, when I was a teenager. And I think that's where my activism began at that point where we finally had a venue, a place where we can hold civil society activities and where youth can come and express themselves, create clubs, do activities. Except the fact that I was a girl, and it was more challenging for me to have access to that space than it was for the boys of my community. Back then, I had I faced a lot of resistance from my family to be able to go to the youth center. It was mainly because of the reputation that the center had at the beginning. All the community thought that it was just a place for boys to meet girls, and they didn't really understand the point in letting their girls go there, and they were scared of their reputation. So that's when I started my, I guess, with my activism, as I mentioned, first with my family, to convince my family first to let me go to this youth center. It took me months and a lot of crying to finally be able to go there. But thankfully, once I was able to have access to the youth center, I was able then to help many other girls in my community to also have access. Both my parents were teachers in the community, so they were well respected and they were well trusted. So the fact that my parents finally let me go, other girls used that as an argument also to have access to the youth center. And since then, I created, I was part of many initiatives in my community. I was kind of a leader of change in the community as I created an NGO for women's empowerment, working with other women in my community and other girls. I also organized many events in my community. I was really passionate about change, and since then I felt that I was born to do more than just become a wife or really stick to some social norms. And since that young age, I really committed. I committed to making an impact in my community, and we can talk maybe more in details throughout this this conference. But that's just a little bit of background about myself.
Absolutely, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Now, moving forward, I just wanted to take some time to discuss, the detrimental effects that this pandemic has been having on women, minorities, and children around the world. As we know, it has disproportionately affected women and girls, specifically those that come from low-income backgrounds. Much of the progress that was made to advance women's rights in the last 50 years has been lost or slowed down. Schools have closed, employment opportunities are scarce, families are losing one of their only sources of income, and now many parents are viewing marrying off their daughters as the only option. Instead of perceiving their daughters as future educated working women, families are continuing to view them as financial burdens, and that's been exacerbated by the pandemic specifically. Latest data from Slave the Children indicates that there could be 61 million child marriages by 2025 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the greatest surge in 25 years. Young women are facing increasing pressure from their families and their communities to get married and have children, rather than continue their university education and enter the workforce. Fatima Zara, you grew up in a small town in Morocco where most of your classmates were married at 18 years old, and only about 5% actually finished their university education. How were you able to defy these statistics?
Yeah, I don't know if there was a secret formula to it, but I believe it was definitely a challenge at first. Luckily, both my parents were educated, so I think in terms of education, I didn't really have to fight for that. I think my parents expected me to continue my education and get my university degree. But I think definitely in terms of my community and in terms of my society, there was definitely some resistance to that. As you mentioned, I think the role of girls and women in my community were defined by some societal norms, and I think the ultimate goal of a girl was getting married. And I think the issue was not just that society believed that, but also that girls believed that themselves. I think that they were taught that from younger age. I think it was just part of the norm. So for me, it was more challenging to convince the girls that, look, you're meant to be more than just a wife or a mother, but you're meant to be more than that. You can also have a role in society. You get to finish your degree if you want to. You can have a job and support yourself, and if you want to, you shouldn't feel that you have to depend on a husband or your husband's family to feed you and to for life, but you need to be your own self. You develop your own self before you commit to a relationship. So for me, the struggle was really to challenge other girls into thinking outside the box that was set by a societal norm. But definitely for me, I think marriage was not my priority. Even now, it's still not the end goal of my existence in this earth. I feel that I am meant to do more. I think definitely if I feel myself, if I'm convinced that it's time for me, or if I find the right person and it's time for me to get married, yes, why not? But it's not just, I was not just born to be a mother and a wife. So yeah, every day I still get asked, when are you planning to get married, whenever I meet my family. But I think now that they learn to accept me and when they see that you're happy, and when they see that you are successful, and when they see that you're traveling and getting your own house and doing all these things, they finally they're now convinced, well, maybe she made the right choice, and maybe it was good for her that she finished her education and she seems happy, so yeah, let her be.
Absolutely. And, now I'm going to pose a similar question to you, Anne, but what are the benefits of women making the own choice of when they want to get married, when they want to have children, or even if they want to? What benefits does that bring for them from a health perspective, from an economic perspective, and what benefits does that bring their own communities and their own societies?
Well, the obvious one is choice for women, just being treated hopefully equally in this world. Certainly it brings all kinds of health and education benefits to the community in general. I think I'm so struck by Fatima's story, because it's such a classic story of women's empowerment. I define empowerment as having a vision and then developing some sort of plan to follow that vision. And that plan might include education or learning to drive or do something, improving your health or whatever it might be. So empowerment really is having a clear vision and then developing a plan to work toward that vision, and then being able to take the first steps to follow your plan. And as I listened to Fatima, I saw that her parents were supportive of her being able to follow her vision. And I feel that's what women can do, and especially women who have had the luck, I would say, to have the opportunities you mentioned, to help others develop their visions and move forward in their lives. Classic example, Fatima. Thank you for telling your story.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, and that of course Fatima Zara was lucky to be in a family where her parents were educated and they were supportive of her career endeavors. But Fatima, you even mentioned to me that they wanted you to get an education, have a career, but your current career wasn't something that they were all too excited about, and they wanted you to pursue a job that you could balance the responsibilities of being a wife and a mother better. So how did you go about emphasizing your own passions and what Anne called empowerment, and putting that course of your life down for them? How did you have those difficult conversations with your family?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't an easy task at first. So as you mentioned earlier, I studied business and management. I think it was a choice I had to make back then. That wasn't. I think I didn't get really proper counseling, student counseling at the time. So I did not really know what what was my passion or what field I want to continue working on. And definitely my family pushed me to study business and management because of the future that it would might allow me, especially in the job market. But being civil society leader and being an activist, I always thought that that was my reason for being. That's really what made me excited every morning and being able to make a change in my community. But I was not really sure how I can have a job while doing that, and how can I support myself while still doing that, especially knowing that civil society in Morocco is mainly on a volunteering basis. So people really don't get paid as civil society leaders, or NGOs are don't really pay people who work for them. And I was not sure who to work for, where I can still get to do the thing that I'm passionate about. And I still remember that, especially after my last year of college, that my father kept asking me to enroll for a teacher's training to become a university professor. And that was like his dream for me. Like, he said it would be the perfect job for me to be a university professor. You get to teach few hours a day. You still have plenty of free time for your family. If you once you get married, for your kids, and you get to get paid well, and at the same time you still get to do your duties again as a wife and mother. And for me, that was just not who I see myself being. Being a professor was never really my passion, or even the whole education field. And I kept resisting and he kept nagging, and I could continue, like every day would tell me, did you apply? Did you apply? And I remember at one point I was almost about to give up. I thought, maybe, well, he's my father, he knows best, maybe I should just listen to him, and maybe I would regret this if I don't do it now. Maybe he's right. And I don't remember what happened exactly. Maybe I missed the deadline, or I don't know how I I really escaped from that. But thankfully, I didn't apply, and I'm so grateful to this day. And once I graduated, that's when I decided that I didn't want to continue in the business management field or in accounting. And I just told my family, like, I really want to work for an international organization where I will get to follow my passion. And then there was a lot of criticism. It was mainly from the rest of my family, especially my uncles. They were like, why did she change? Why didn't she continue in her field of study? It's like people just want you to follow like a specific path. And once you get outside of that path that they're not familiar with, because there was nobody in my family who worked for an international organization. So for them, it was like potential failure. So because nobody else did it before, so you won't be able to be successful in this field. And they were like, oh, you're not going to be able to have like a long-term career. But I just kept ignoring what they say, and I deep inside I knew that I was making the right choice, because every morning I woke up and I was excited about going to work, and every morning I felt that I'm helping my community. I'm helping other young people in my community, especially now with my job at the embassy. I feel like I really get to make an impact. So I'm happy, and I don't regret it at all. And I think after a couple of years, when they saw that I love my job. And this the notion of loving your job is not really common here. People usually hate their jobs, but when they see that you actually love your job, I'm getting paid well, I have my own house, I have my own car, so they see, well, they were like, oh, maybe she's successful, maybe she made the right choice, so they finally accepted that. So yeah, there will be some resistance at the beginning, but it's all about perseverance. It's all about knowing your truth and knowing yourself. And as long as you think you're making the right choice, I think that's all that matters.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And now for you, Anne, you've worked with women's movements and women from all over the world during your time at the Global Fund for Women and beyond. What benefits have you seen women's higher education and labor force participation bring young women, their families, their communities, and the world as a whole?
You ask obviously an impossible question to answer. I mean, it's all, one would say, pretty much all good. If I may, I would like to hark back a little bit to something that Fatima's story, because when I was young, I graduated from high school very young, and I would not necessarily have gone to university, except my parents said, you're too young to go out into the world and to get married or something like that, so maybe you better go to university. My brother was at university and at Berkeley, at University of California at Berkeley, and I could just go along with him. He was, he was in junior or senior year or something, and I went along with him and entered as a freshman. But it was really just because I was too young to go out into the world, my parents thought, and definitely too young to get married. So though my parents, you might say, were supportive, nothing like what I think Fatima experienced. Your parents were tremendously supportive to you, it seems to me, and lucky you. The question that I have been thinking about as we're thinking about speaking with each other today was, how can we help others? I mean, we both had lucky childhoods. What can we do? And I think back today again, thinking of my childhood and my time going to university, which was just luck. I mean, in other words, you're too young to go out and get married, so go to university. I mean, you're supposed to do something. So I went to university. Not that it was planned for me, nor was it a great big vision for me until I got to university, when I loved it and wanted to be out into the world, and wanted to graduate and go do something important. I wanted to work for the United Nations, and I ended up working for the United Nations. So this was slightly different paths, you might say. But I think, how can, my mother would always say, we're lucky people. We have food on the table. I grew up during the Second World War, and our cousins were in England. They were hiding under staircases from the bombs. We were lucky people because we were living in Canada at that time. And so we were safe. And so my mother would always say, you must help others. We're the lucky ones. We're the ones who have the strength to help others. And helping others meant something as little as standing up on the bus so that an older person or a disabled person could sit down. I mean, something very direct in our own lives. So what am I saying? I'm trying to answer your question. That is, when one is empowered, when one does have those opportunities, as I did, I think the huge benefit is that it empowers a person to be able to help others become empowered, or to just live life more fully, or to just put food on the table. So it's nothing but good, it seems to me. I think that there are people who see some negative aspects of educating girls and having women go out in the workplace. I mean, certainly there are people who think it's a terrible thing and it's undermining the society that women should be so independent. But I'm sorry, I have a pretty closed mind about it. I can only see positive outcomes.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think we are all fortunate to have, you know, parents that thought education was important for us, that understood that marriage should be a decision that we make for ourselves about when and with whom, and, you know, when we're ready to take those next steps. But unfortunately, you know, we have some participants whose parents may not, you know, have those same mindsets about their own, you know, their own daughters' goals and their ambitions and what their daughters may be capable of, you know, accomplishing in the future. So what advice or what strategies can these young women that come from perhaps communities that are not as supportive of women's education or women's career, you know, opportunities, what advice can we give them, you know, to those that want to prioritize their education careers but are facing those pressures to get married, to start a family before they are ready or before they want to? Fatima Zara, you can go ahead, because I'm sure there were those in your community that were in those positions, but what advice would you have given them during that time?
Are you talking to me?
I was referring to Fatima Zara, but I would love to have you add on once she's done.
Oh, and I just didn't know who you were directing your question to. Well, I'll jump in quickly, though. I think Fatima, no doubt, will have advice. I think it's very important not to be alone. I think I'm very impressed by the importance of women. I happen to have worked with women for many years, coming together in groups and supporting each other, being kind to each other, being helpful to each other. And I've been just struck, amazed. I remember meeting people and traveling in Africa and visiting women's organizations and just outrightly asking women there, how do you do this? How have you created successful organizations in the midst of poverty and tremendous difficulty and discrimination? And the answers they vary, but one answer that often comes up is, well, our friends, we got together, we talked about our lives and we wanted things to be better, and we decided that we'd create a little organization. And, you know, and they had strength coming together and supporting each other's dreams. And some other people said, my faith, some people's faith in some higher good. I don't happen to be a particularly formally religious person by any means, but many people said that to me, that there was that community, that there was that sense that they belonged and that their faith would carry them through in an extremely difficult circumstances that I've never seen in my life, except by meeting others who've gone through these difficulties.
And you mentioned community, Anne, and how important that has been in your lifetime, either at the Global Fund or with the women's groups that you've worked with. How do young women go about forming those communities, and what makes an effective community of supportive women?
Maybe Fatima has ideas, but let me quickly answer and say, one of the things that absolutely amazed me in creating and developing the Global Fund for Women was the number of communities out there. I mean, there are millions of women's groups all over the place in every country you can think of. I'll give some examples later, but and I think when we began the Global Fund for Women, we thought, can we raise money to give away to women's groups? Is that's a challenge? But more important, we learned, are there women's groups out there that we can actually give the money to? And yes, there were hundreds of them, millions of them. What holds them together? I think a mutual desire to change the world for the better, and a mutual desire to help each other, to express, we might even say, to express love toward each other, to support people. Now, I want to come back to this later. I don't want to talk about that at the moment.
Absolutely. Fatima Zara, do you have anything that you would like to add on advice that you would give women that don't come from supportive families or communities for their education careers?
Yeah, I think my first advice is not to get frustrated and lose hope. And it's all about expectations. I think nobody should expect that you can make a big change or a big shift in the mindset of your community overnight. That it's a process. And but I think that the first step is to start by yourself. I think every single girl should work on herself to develop her own skills, to be well equipped, then to face the rest of the community or rest of society. And then at the same time, help others. And just like you mentioned, the importance of having a support system of other women, and both getting support from other women, but also providing help to others and mentoring other women. And I feel that in my, just to give an example of my community, I think when we were able to make some tangible change was when we started this NGO for women. It was not easy at first. There was a lot of backlash from the men in the community, but I think you need to find ways to connect with the community. For example, for us, we had first to convince the mothers, because as I mentioned at first, I think all the girls and women in the community believed that that's exactly what, that marriage or that education was not important for them, and that marriage was their ultimate goal. So I think first you have to start with shifting the minds of the women, and then you can move to the men. Bringing women together to a safe place and starting light. So you can just come the first day and like, look, you're meant to be more than this, and just. But for example, we started with literacy classes for the women who did not get to finish their high school, for example, or even some of them didn't even finish primary school. So we started educating the women, the other women first, and then just seeing happiness in their eyes once they start being able to read sentences and being able to, for some of them or other who were more advanced, to help their little kids with their homework. And then they started to understand, well, maybe I think that they started to understand the benefits of being educated. And then they were like, well, I don't want my daughters to be in the same position as me. I want them to be more educated. And then comes the next step of being financially independent. So we started with helping the women create some small cooperatives, for example, just making cookies and selling them, or making argan oil, or some crafts or artisanal work. And then once they started having some source of income, then they felt even more independent, and they felt, well, yeah, and actually I have my own money now. I can buy things that my husband wouldn't buy for me. So now then they see that the importance of having your own money, and then and that started to shift their mindset. So I think it's all about starting slow and really understanding your community and just being really patient at the beginning. You find that a lot of doors will be closed in front of you, but start with just one door first, and then so it's all one step at a time. But knowing that you're not necessarily doing this just for yourself, but for the other girls that are coming after you, and the next generations as well. So it's a big shift in the community.
Absolutely, and I think this goes well with, you know, what Anne was talking about, empowerment and what empowerment means for women. So Anne, you know, how can women empower themselves and the women around them? And how and why should men empower women?
My goodness. Well, how? As I said, I think that it's very important to come together with friends. I think it's very important to have somebody to talk with, somebody to work with if you can, or not even work, play with, friends, so that you can sort of empower each other, you might say, encourage each other. as I said, my definition of empowerment, I've already mentioned it. It is to have a vision. I think it probably starts to have a vision for change. How do I want my life to be? Where do I want to go? What kind of future do I want? Even if I can't imagine quite how to get there, do I have a vision? Do I want to get a university education, or do I want to be a good mother? I mean, there are many different visions that people may have. And what do I have to do? And you both talked about this. What do I have to do to get moving toward that vision? Often people will think it's education. I mean, that may be the key intervention, but the nature of education is important. It's not just a matter of going to some school and learning some stuff that someone wants to hand over to you, but to educate in a way that makes a difference. And that there then comes to this point of how can we help each other bring out the best in us, bring out the spirit in us, maybe the strength, yes, but also kindness and love. How can we're trying to create a world that is better. At least that's my vision. I had this vision, but it's a pretty broad vision. So I completely agree with Fatima that we can hope to save the world, but we may have to start and very small with our families, with our friends, and care for each other. I'll come back to this later and as we speak and what I mean by that. But I don't know if I'm answering your questions. They're very difficult to answer specifically. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. And you mentioned that change starts from within, and it starts from home, and influence on one woman's life or one of your friends' life can be that propellant for them to change the way they view themselves, to feel empowered, and to have those conversations at home. And when we talk about gender equality and ultimately achieving that, it starts from each individual household and each girl and boy around the world to feel like women and men are equal. And so the world will be a better place when from each and every story, and one person can make that big of a difference in really achieving equality in the way that we want it to. Fatima, Zahra, do you have anything to add on to that?
I think you guys covered it all. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add on that.
And you were discussing, what it means to love and to care for. So would you like to go more, into depth on that? Is she?
Hi, I'm sorry, I dropped off. My screen blacked off.
No worries. No, I just wanted to go back when you were discussing what it means to care for each other, and the benefits and the power that love holds in communities, in women's lives. So I wanted to know if you wanted to touch more into that.
Well, if you're talking to me, I would say, obviously I mentioned, everyone says the way to solve all these problems of the world is through education. Yes, it's important, very important, key, you might say, but it's also, in my mind, more important to try to learn and practice kindness. We need to be very aware of how we're treating each other. It can change the world. And we can learn kindness from many people. They don't have to be university educated. They can be very ordinary people. They can be people who are maybe our caregivers when we're young or whatever. But we can, to me, it's incredibly important to not just focus on education, but on the nature of our relationships and how we're treating each other and being very conscious of this. I'll come back to that later because I have something I want to share, but I don't want to dominate here.
No, you can go ahead and share, and feel free to take the time to do so now.
Well, it sounds very touchy-feely for me to say this, but I have been very influenced by a definition of love by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist monk. And I just read this somewhere, and it's made a huge difference to me. It was, in fact, as you mentioned, I teach at Stanford on international women's health and human rights, but I also have taught for the past 5 or 6 years a class on love as a force for social justice. And I got very interested in the concept of love and what is it. And Thich Nhat Hanh has a definition that he describes through 4 mantras. And his definition of love is sort of the following. Dear one, I am here for you. That's the first mantra. The second, dear one, I see you and it makes me happy. The third mantra is, dear one, I see that you are in pain and that is why I am here for you. And the fourth mantra is, dear one, I am in pain. Please help me. Those 4 mantras add up to what love means in Thich Nhat Hanh's mind, I guess. But I have taken those and I've thought they are fantastic guideposts for life, to move forward, to help people feel empowered, to pass on the luck that we have had to others, to try to change the world. And I mention these because I think they're concise and I think they're quite profound.
No, absolutely. Fatima, Zahra, before we move into our Q&A, in which participants can take this time to pose questions to you too, we were talking about advice to give young women, but how have you seen in your own life the benefits of your education and your career choices make on your self-confidence, on the way your family views you and your community views you? How have you seen that play out in the grander scheme of things?
I think once a woman is educated and feels empowered, I think she's definitely making an impact on all her surroundings. I feel that way, at least with myself and my surroundings. I feel that I positively impact my family, my brothers, my little cousins. I feel that a lot of people consider me as their mentor, which is definitely a big responsibility. I feel that way also at work and in my travels. I feel that I am positive. I'm a positive person, someone who has an impact, making a change, a positive change. And I think all of that was because of my education. When I say education, I don't mean just the academic education that we get at school, but I'm a vivid reader. I read a lot, so I continue to work on myself, and I never think that I know everything or I've reached the maximum of knowledge. So I'm always try to be humble and try to listen to other people, learn from other people. So I feel that I am always growing. So I'm always seeking more knowledge, seeking help, seeking advice from others. And I feel that that's what keeps me growing, and that's what empowers me, and indirectly it empowers my surroundings. So it's all about being hungry for knowledge and working on yourself, working on your soft skills, also understanding your strengths and weaknesses and acknowledging your weaknesses, and not letting them stop you from things. So say maybe I'm not good at this, but I'm working on it, and not being afraid to ask for help or ask for advice, but at the same time acknowledge your strengths and say, well, I'm really good at this, and not being shy to say that. But I think my biggest advice is to never compare yourself to others. I had to learn it the hard way, but I think definitely for every girl who's here, or not just girls, but even boys, I think you should never compare yourself to others, because every person has a different starting point, or a different background, or a different baggage, if you want to say, that comes with them. Everybody has a different life, different circumstances, different things that they had to go through. So I think the definition of success is different from one person to another. So it's all about being yourself, being unique, and being who you are, and being good at it. And let people be good at in their own way. And so I never make that comparison. I think that's it.
No, thank you for sharing. Now we're going to move in to our Q&A, in which participants can ask their questions in the chat box. And one question that I think Becky has had for us above is, Anne, you mentioned love and the role of love in empowering women in themselves. How can women and men instill love in their own households and use that to establish equal gender roles and establish equality within their own households? I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. Sorry. I'm not now, I guess. How can one do that? I think that one can try to put in place. For me, it was sort of discovering and then thinking, oh, I want to be like that. The mantras of Thich Nhat Hanh, but I'm not a groupie. I don't follow and sit at the feet of people and that kind of thing, but they made sense to me. And I was reminded when Fatima was speaking most recently that she really was talking about leadership. And we are now beginning to think and talk about leadership. And we are leaders, and probably everyone who signed up for this meeting is a leader, has a computer, is out there participating and wanting to learn and all of that. As leaders, how do we model and how do we set in place in our lives these concepts of love? I couldn't agree more with Fatima that it begins with oneself, but we must go beyond. We can continue to improve ourselves, educate ourselves, and try to be really good people. But we must hand it on. We must hand it on to our children, to our friends, whatever. Again, I'm not sure I'm answering your question. The question is how? Sometimes it requires being very strong. I mean, going against norms, doing things that, I even had people saying to me, if you get yourself too educated, no man is going to want to marry you. I remember that I'm of the age, that where that silly thing was said to me by people, literally. If you go get these graduate degrees, no one's going to want to marry you. And marriage was still a goal, maybe even the goal. It was never the goal for me, but for most of my friends it was. Again, I'm babbling. I'm not answering your question. Sorry about that. I'm going to hand it back to you.
No, and you mentioned your comment about education. Don't know too much, don't say too much. And I think a lot of in our programs, women have said that if we talk and we act like we know too much, people around us make fun of us. They don't view our knowledge as a way to take us more seriously, but a way to shut us down and a way to silence us. And I think it's important that we use our education as a tool to give ourselves a seat at the table and as a strength, and not as something that as a force of power for ourselves, but not something that men or those in our community should be afraid of us for, but it's an asset. And so I think that's so important to recognize, you know, the force of education, not just any education like you, Anne, were mentioning, but education can look in different ways. It doesn't have to just be a degree or you know, a PhD or graduate education, but it's what you do with that education that really does matter. And I'm sure you've worked with women's movements around the world where, you know, perhaps not all of them have a university education, but they don't necessarily need that to propel movements, to start conversation of gender equality, and make a change in their community either.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, at participants, you know, we have around 5 more minutes before we go into our breakout rooms. And so you feel free to ask questions. We have a question from Srimati. Have you ever been stuck in a situation where you were directly faced with sexism? And if you have, how did you combat it? Fatima Zara, would you like to go ahead and take this one away?
Yeah, I think this, I don't think it happened once or twice. I think this is still something that women face, not just in Morocco, I believe, but I think all over the world. I still remember, for me, mostly when I was still maybe a teenager. So I'm the oldest, and I have 3 younger brothers, and there were some things that my parents did or asked of me that didn't ask my brothers, or vice versa. And I always, because I was the only girl, I always thought like, why do they get to do that and I don't get to do it? Or why I was asked, for example, to clean the dishes and they were not asked to clean the dishes. And I always remember that I would always face my parents. I was like, why? Is it because I'm a girl? I always remember I asked them, and that shocked them a lot. They were not used to hearing that. And I think for some things they didn't do them in purpose. I think it was just like the gender roles that were in the community, and I think that really, because I asked why, it made my parents think. And thankfully that really, because I stood up for myself, and whenever I felt that I had to do things that my brothers didn't do, or vice versa, I always stood up to that, and I always said why, and I refused to do it. And that made my parents rethink about some of the things that they would ask me. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but at least slowly it made a change. Eventually my brothers helped with the home chores, that they cleaned the dishes as well. We had a rotation system. They cooked as well. So I think you just have to, whenever you're treated, you shouldn't just accept it, but make the point at least. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but to at least make the point. And it will make people rethink what they said, because as I mentioned, sometimes it's just the gender roles that people are just used to that, and they don't really think about it.
No, absolutely. And, you know, change truly does start from home. And oftentimes, at least, you know, working in Morocco and seeing that a lot of parents unconsciously put these different roles for their daughters and sons, perhaps not even intentionally or realizing that they were holding, you know, their sons and their daughters to different standards. So whether it would be that the daughter is expected to cook and clean and go to school, whereas the son is allowed to go play soccer with his friends outside, or he's allowed to have, you know, some money to go buy candy, but she's not allowed to have that. And so, you know, one is just pointing it and calling it out and say, Mom, Dad, why do I have to do this, but my brother doesn't have to? And why is he allowed to do this, but not me? And, you know, those small things, pointing it out at home, perhaps your parents will even start noticing it even more and be like, and question themselves, well, why is it like this? And why, you know, why do we treat you differently? And, you know, once you start questioning the very innate, you know, societal norms and the gender roles that, you know, have been passed down from generation and generation, they'll stop viewing it as, oh, that's just the way things have always been. But now, what can we do to change that? And, you know, you young women in this audience, you know, if you're mothers right now, or your will-be mothers or wives or whatever you choose to be, now it's your job within your own homes to treat your sons and daughters the same, point it out and really let, your children know and your spouse know that we need to treat them equally and question why we do the things we do. Anne, do you have anything to add on to that?
Well, no, I think you're eloquent on the topic, frankly. I was looking at the chat box and asked, and we were asked whether or not we'd ever experienced misogyny and what did we do about it? Yes, yes, and yes. And I mean, my biggest example for that, and I would like to mention it, was that I was working for a very good organization. And I got a call at some point from a friend who said, I'm doing an analysis of salaries of organizations in the Bay Area. And I wonder why you're putting up with being paid 20% less than the men on the staff. And I didn't know it. I just didn't know it. So I went to the president of the organization and I said, I've just learned that I'm being paid 20% less than the men on the staff. And what can I conclude from this? I said to the president. And he turned to me and he said, how did you find this out? And I said, well, somebody's doing a study and they told me about it and they were upset about it and wondered why I put up with it. And he then turned to me and he said, you're making a very good salary for a woman. Now, you probably could sue someone for that now. This was many years ago. But he said, you're making a good salary for a woman. I stayed on at that organization for the next 4 or 5 years. And my salary never was equal. It was raised, but it was never equal with the males. What did I do? The question, well, how do you deal with that? Well, I dealt with it by confronting it, and I didn't succeed then. But the story got out, and other women succeeded later. And finally, I think I probably was treated equally in my next job or something. I don't know. How can we deal with this? Someone in the chat has asked, is it easy? Is it easy to deal with this? Of course, it is not easy. People take chances and they even don't try to confront misogyny because they know that it might cost them their job or they might be discriminated against in serious, dangerous ways. No, it is not easy, but sometimes it can be the way you described it. I think you can ask why. You can ask why and get other people asking why, and the conversation goes on, and things ultimately change. Women are still unfairly, treated unequally in the United States for similar work, and those statistics are around. Lots of people know them. Why hasn't it changed? We haven't had enough people asking why.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, one of the most important takeaways that we hope you all get out of this is ask why, especially when it comes to oppression or inequality. Ask why, figure out why, and then use that, as your way to develop a vision for how you will go about to change that. Now I would like to go ahead and thank you both for being a part of our wonderful conference here today. I'm going to go ahead and move forward, share a couple of more insights in the next step. So this recording will be posted on our social media, YouTube, and our website. There will be a follow-up survey and upcoming program info sent via email, and all participants will receive a certificate of participation. Next Saturday, actually, we have our Women's Entrepreneurship Conference in the Middle East, North Africa region. This conference will be our first conference in Arabic, which we are very excited about. The registration link is here, and we will also send out an email with this information to all participants of this conference. We are launching upcoming programs in several different regions that I'll just touch briefly on. We are going to be launching our program in Palestine in March, our social entrepreneurship program, as well as in Pakistan, India, Ethiopia, and Morocco again in September. So stay tuned with our newsletter and our website to learn more information about this. We would like to, just go ahead and thank our funders and our partners, our local partners in Morocco, Pakistan, and Palestine, as well as, the Department of State and the U.S. Embassy in Rabat for the grant we receive for our programs in Morocco, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, their employees that give to us, as well as from Verizon Media. You can reach us at codehergirls.org on our social media platforms, our website, codehergirls.org, as well as our email info@codehergirls.org. We would like to go ahead and start our breakout rooms now. Fatima Zara, you can go ahead and leave whenever you need to, and you said that you could stay. And we would love that if you wouldn't mind staying maybe a little bit after to see if we have any other questions from participants, have you involved in the breakout rooms, and meet the amazing young women coming from over 22 countries today to take part in our conversation. So thank you both for this wonderful conference. It was a pleasure learning from both of your perspectives and experiences, and I know our audience feels the same way.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed talking to you guys. Take good care, and let's continue this discussion again.
Absolutely, wonderful. So now I'm gonna go ahead and put everyone in breakout rooms. So going ahead and doing that. Okay. Feel free, everyone, to also, ask questions in the chat box. We're fortunate that Anne is able to stay with us a little bit longer as well. And she's here to answer your questions. So thank you so much, Anne, for joining us for this.
I'll be here for maybe another 15 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you. Okay, we're going to breakout rooms.
Excuse me, I don't know how to respond to the chats, but can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
I mean, I'd be perfectly happy if people want to send me an email or something. There is a question, how can we be in touch with the speakers? And I don't mind people sending me an email, but I can't seem to put a message into the chat room. So
no problem at all. Or they can, email, codeHER or myself, and I can forward you the messages as well. Whatever works.
That's fine. Okay. So
wonderful. I'm gonna go ahead and put you. Did you receive an invitation to join a breakout room by any chance? Oh, okay.
Name of Saniya is in our breakout room.
Yes.
Yeah, I see. Wafa from Meknes, from the University of Moulay Ismail, Morocco.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Would everyone want to go ahead, say their name, where they're coming in from?
Yeah. Can I?
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, as I said, okay, so start my video or not?
Yes, go ahead and start your video. We would love to see everyone here now.
Yeah, you can see me now. Hello, everybody. Good to see you. I'm very glad to be involved in this conference, which was very interesting. I'm Professor Aboukir Wafa from Moulay Ismail University and also president of the Association for the Protection of Moroccan Family in Meknes. I liked what Professor Murray said about the idea of women creating that network between them. And I believe that the associations are a key to allow that. And I've seen that within the association, how women, when they started their first day in the association, how they feel lonely and all that. But after 3 days or 4, they started to talk that they're already like a family. And this family creates a kind of cooperation between them in which they share their experiences and their problems, something that they cannot offer sometimes at home. Because sometimes at home, like I see, when I talk to these women, even their problems, sometimes they cannot share it with their husbands sometimes because they live in such patriarchal society where the man's world is outside and the woman's world is inside. And this is a really big issue that these women live. And for them, the association becomes like, the oxygen where they breathe. And that's why it's very important to have associations that help these women,
Yeah.
I don't want
where
to dominate.
Where are you from? I did not hear.
I'm from Morocco.
Morocco. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm from Morocco.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I don't want to dominate the whole discussion, you know, whether I have to go on or not. Let's give the chance to other people, and then I might come back again, you know. I don't know.
No, absolutely. Would anyone else like to go ahead and introduce themselves? Sandra, Adele, Fatmata, Sylvia.
Yeah, I could go next. So hi,
Yes.
everyone. It's really nice to meet you all. My name is Sandra Acheng. I work for Women of Uganda Network as the program manager under the information sharing and networking. So Women of Uganda Network is based in Kampala, Uganda, and we basically empower women through the use of ICT. So we do work around inclusion of gender and ICT policies. We do a lot of governance and accountability, online gender-based violence, service delivery, entrepreneurship, and name it. So I'm happy to be here and get to learn what each of you are working on. Thank you.
Can we see you, Sandra?
Yes.
No. There she is. Hi.
Hello, Sandra. It's so good to see you. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves? Sylvia, Adele, Fatmata? And, you know, we would love to also continue a conversation about what you all felt about the conference. Sylvia, would you like to go ahead and speak?
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm Sylvia Chirande. I work with EASI, the Eastern African Sub-Regional Support Initiative for the Advancement of Women in Uganda. It is a sub-regional civil society organization made up of committed NGOs and coalitions working in over 9 countries, which is Burundi, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. And we work through our different focal points. So, yes.
That's great to hear, Sylvia. How old are you?
I'm 26.
Oh, wow. And how long have you been working for this organization?
I've been with EASI for 3 years. I'm their communications and IT officer.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. I would love to also, Adele and Fatmata, if you want to introduce yourselves or just, you know, hear about what you all felt about the conference and, you know, specifically what you all see in your communities as problems that women are facing and how your organizations have, you know, started to tackle those problems and develop solutions. Adele, Sylvia, Fatmata, if anyone wants to chime in.
Yeah, can I?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, not to talk about, you know, this become not from this association, but just to raise the issue that you raised about early marriages in Morocco and the alarming figure you gave during COVID-19. And for me, it's very important also to understand the context of early marriages in Morocco. Why that happens. We have to consider the factors that push to that. And there are many factors, you know, like there is the level of education, and we really know that 1/4 of Moroccan girls are not educated. They don't go to schools. So there is that. Number 2, there is the problem of poverty, you know, like the area of Bni Mellal, Merzouga, Azrou, and all that, where, you know, people witness the phenomenon of early marriages is due to the poverty of these communities. That means marrying a woman is a mouth less to feed. And this is also another big issue that have to be taken into account. We have also to consider that the Muduwana, or the Code of the Family, has already, you know, said that, you know, early marriages should be not allowed in Morocco, but yet it continues for the reason that also there is the gender norms. That means the women are restricted to certain traditions and, conservative, communities where the women don't have any say. And we have also another problem which is religious, marriage by fatiha, that these girls sometimes are already married through the fatiha. This is the custom of the village. And sometimes these people don't have even the means to go to the court to do a civil marriage. That's a really big problem, And that, religious issue make what? That the fatiha, is recognized by the village, but is not recognized by the state as a marriage. And here it's a big problem. And what happens is sometimes the girl is pregnant by the time the judge has to say whether yes to the marriage or not. So when she is pregnant, it's rather the judge sometimes is obliged to say yes to this marriage to save the honor of the family, because we have to bear in mind that, any wedlock, any sexual relationship out of wedlock is forbidden by the law, in Morocco. This is something that till now, it's still forbidden. And when you are married with the fatiha, that means it's already recognized by a religious person who has a certain power within that village. So there are many problems that face why we have such a number, big number of early marriages till nowadays. And this is something that we have to consider too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Anne, you've worked extensively on women's health, and, would you like to touch on the, detrimental consequences that early marriage and early pregnancy can have on women's health while they're young, and then, continuing on in their lives?
Well,
well, definitely. Yeah. Go ahead, Professor Murray. Yeah.
No, I think what you just said essentially speaks to what Saniya is asking. I don't think anyone who cares seriously about women's health and girls' health would advocate marriage, early marriage. I mean, it's dangerous for girls. It's economically questionable. Even though it exists, as you've just explained. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Wafa? Wafa. As Wafa has explained, it's often an economic decision on the part of the family to send girls out into another family to be fed and to be looked after. So I don't think there's any positive outcome of early marriage, whatever country it exists in. And when you really seriously think of the decision that a family comes to, it would be easy to think that it's mean and awful. But in some ways, I think parents and families are just forced into doing something from an economic standpoint to look after their daughters, and it may be seen as a positive decision in some places when you send a daughter to another household.
Absolutely. And I think that comes down to the point as, families looking at their daughters as financial burdens, because they don't think that, they can bring in an income and they can be working women that can also provide economic support to the family along with other, forms of support. My grandma, she was married at 12 years old. And at that time in India, that was just the norm. By the time she was born, her parents had already picked out a spouse for her. And her dad was actually a principal of a middle school, but she wasn't even allowed to go to school. She didn't know how to read and write, yet her father was an educator and a principal. And so it just comes down to the fact that, especially during this pandemic, families may not have the money to financially support their daughters, and they would rather give them off. And maybe they're even thinking that they're doing what's best for their daughter by having them live with another family that can support them or a husband that can support them. But it just comes down to, you know, in essence, changing that mindset that women aren't financial burdens or burden of any sort, but they're assets and they're a support mechanism, and they can truly bring about change and really, you know, empower their families and their children and, you know, their communities.
Well, a response, I mean, yes and yes, but sometimes that financial burden continues. I mean, we have to work on all fronts to make sure that girls who wish to be educated and then to move on into jobs can in fact get into schools and can in fact get jobs.
Exactly.
I mean, there's discrimination, discrimination that goes on through the life cycle.
And it's unfortunate that, you know, many women come from villages or communities where access to education, you know, isn't there, or they may not have access to employment opportunities. And that's the reason why they are being married at a young age, just because there's no other way out for them in terms of their parents or their own outlook as well.
No.
Yeah. And Saniya, there is something that is really interesting to also look at, is that in the past, we didn't even talk about early marriages. And this is, I find it a positive asset that we talk about it, and that even Morocco, you know, like committed itself to end early marriages by 2030. I hope so, you know, even if we know that the number is escalating, but there are, in fact, associations, there are also, you know, legal laws that are working against early marriages. So there is a positive side here, you know. That's what makes me optimist, you know, in fact. But as Professor Almari said, I agree totally that it's 100% harmful for girls to get married at an early age, at all levels, you know. This is something that we have to be aware of, and to make people aware of that is not only, you know, the economical impact, but the psychological, you know, impact on the girl to get married at early age is so awful, you know, that it sometimes shocked her for all her life, you know, and
absolutely,
that's
both psychological and physical, for that matter.
Exactly.
I'm very Wafa, I'm very glad that you turned the conversation to a positive, trying to put a positive slant on it. And I had mentioned earlier that one of the things that really gives me hope, because, you know, we could become very downhearted over all of these issues, is the tremendous development of women's groups all over the world. I don't have an example from Morocco that of women's groups that have been supported by the Global Fund for Women, but I tried to get examples of young women's groups that were supported, that have been supported by the Global Fund. And there are many, many from Burundi, Mali, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Mauritius. You know, I have all these examples of women's groups that have come together in these countries. And these are young women's groups. I asked the Global Fund for Women to send me a list of the young women's groups that they had supported. And I was really impressed, and I've been really inspired over my life by the efforts of women who've come together. I suspect there are similar women's groups in Morocco, Wafa.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, everywhere. You know, like as you said, and that's what makes us positive. You know, about the future is the fact that even in Morocco there are so many women who are. And I'm going to use the word fighting. You know, I'm not against that word, because we have to fight the patriarchy that exists, you know, within our society. You know, It doesn't go smoothly. You know, if you want something, you need to fight for it. You need to stand for it, you know, and fortunately, there are many, many women who are working for that, for realizing this, you know, in different areas, you know, political, economical, you know, and so on, you know. And just to talk, personally, to talk about my personal experience as a woman in a family of 9, 5 boys and 4 girls, I think what gives us power as women was it come from our father and mother, who were the authority in the home. I wasn't raised in a house where my brother had to stay to tell me what to do or not what to do. The only, authority figures were our parents for all of us. And that, we were brought up with that notion of equality at home, which is very important, because you grow up with the sense that you're equal to your brother. Even if you see your friends complaining about that, you find like your family is an exception, and maybe sometimes we are lucky to be born in families like that. That's what empowers us as women. And I remember, like my mother was, she could read, but my father didn't want her to work because at that time, like in the society, women didn't go out to work. And my father was a little bit conservative with his wife, but she insisted on our education by telling us that it's going to be the key to our independence. And I believe that education and financial independence is first what empowers women, number one. And then, of course, what your status within the society, etc., etc. This is very important, and that's what I try to teach my young students, at university, to tell them that they have to seize the opportunity and to get their financial independence. That's what's going to give them the respect within their family. It's very important.
Yeah. Well, Saniya, somebody asked about men, whether we can deal with men, and at some point that might be an interesting topic for you to do a meeting on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I didn't respond to that, and it is another difficult question, but it is a question that we really must think more about. How can we bring men in as allies, and why would men want to? I think there are absolutely wonderful answers to the question of why men would want to empower women.
Especially them making up 50% of the conversation, they need to make up 50% of the discussion as well. And that's, so important. We can't bring about equality or change without including them in the conversation and having them think of feminism and gender equality as ways to better society, and not something that's going to bring them down, but is just going to lift everyone up to the same standard. And, I'm glad that there were men taking part in today's discussion that chose to educate themselves as well. But, one is how women can empower women. And the second side of that coin is how can men empower women? And that's just a whole nother issue that really has so many different, layers to it, of how we even begin to have those conversations with not just the women around us, but the men in our lives too.
Exactly.
And the men have needs to be themselves. They need empowerment to be themselves too, to be the gentlemen that we like.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I think what happened in the history of feminism, I'm talking about Morocco, that we focus a lot on women and we neglect men, as if we're thinking that the men are going to understand easily the empowerment of women, and that's a big problem, like till nowadays, for instance, we still have some women who believe that the role of the woman, even if she is educated and she has her, job and all that, first to serve her husband and her family. Well, I have nothing against that, but that creates unequal rules within the family for me, That means like if I work and he works, we have to share everything. Since we're sharing everything, if we are sharing our salaries, we have to share everything inside and outside. And this is something that we haven't worked yet a lot in our communities about that.
Hi.
There we go.
Did you have a question, Marissa?
Yeah, do you have the link to the where you can check in for the conference so that people can put in their emails and phone numbers?
Yes, I'm gonna put that in the chat right now.
Thank you. I got disconnected halfway through the conference, so I lost
No
that
problem. I'm gonna be closing the breakout room soon too, shortly.
With chores, or I would, I'm not gonna treat a woman this way than it would be for a woman to stand out, because the other men are gonna be like, well, that's not a manly quality. That's not how to act. So the empowerment itself of men, and more than including them in the conversation, like empowering them actively as well, is really half the battle.
Yeah, and it's everywhere, Emily, like it's not just in Morocco. That's a universal issue. That's patriarchal, aspect of the society. It just has different facades according to the society we live in, but it exists everywhere. It's a universal phenomenon.
Well, Sylvia, it's great to see you on video. Sandra, Adele, Sylvia, haven't heard too much from you all, so you can go ahead.
May I say something small?
Would you like to share your thoughts or say anything, Sylvia, Adele, or Sandra?
Yeah, I could just say that I'm so glad to join this conversation and hear all your perspective and the amazing work that you're doing. I really love what Dr. Anna shared during our presentation in the main room. It was really inspiring. So for me, what I would just say is that as we do our work every day, we should really emphasize the power of love, and then basically showing love in whatever we do, and do it with one heart. Yeah, so that we empower each other, support one another, and work together.
Thank you for sharing that, Sandra. Sylvia or Adele, anything to add before we go back to a larger group meeting?
Yes. We're involving men. There's a project we had a few years back, and it was empowering women. We would train women, like we would call in the women, teach them empowerment skills like making soap, making tomato sauce, basically things that they can make and sell and make income. But we got a problem whereby whenever the women would go back home, their men there was so much domestic violence. They would beat them for coming home late. They would beat them for not giving them part of in case there was transport refund. But then once we realized that problem, we made another project in line with that project called Men Engage. So we also brought in the men to support their women, to also understand what their women are doing, such that they will not go back home and think the women are doing something else. And in all the projects we've had, that was the most successful project, because we got to involve the men as well to see what was going on with the women and how we're teaching the women to do basic activities and in order to get income in whatever they were doing.
That's so great to hear. Thank you for sharing that, Sylvia. That's an amazing project and just touches on the point of why it's important to include men in the conversation. Adele, do you have anything that you would like to add before we go to our larger groups meeting? Let's see, able to. If not, we're gonna actually go from our breakout room back to a group setting, and I'll finish off with a couple of last points, and then talk about next steps for everyone in terms of staying in contact with each other, forming a community within this breakout room and within everyone, different sections. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. In the meantime, before we do that, can everyone put their in the chat box their email and their phone number, and remember the breakout room that you all are coming in from. So we'll have a breakout room group chat as well as a larger WhatsApp group chat. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and close the rooms in 1 minute. Emily, did Anne leave?
Yes, just while you were away, she sent her regards and she had to head off.
Okay, well, I'm so glad she was able to join us for the breakout rooms.
Yeah, that was really great.
That was so exciting. Okay. There you go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking part in our breakout rooms and joining us today, waiting for everyone to come back to this larger group setting. Hopefully everyone got a lot out of it. I'm going to go ahead and also put in the link for you all to join our WhatsApp group. And this is the WhatsApp group specific to this conference, so everyone can continue to network and stay in touch with everyone. I've just put down that within the group chat. So everyone, as you're coming in to our session, into our general group session, here is the WhatsApp group link to join and to stay in contact with everyone post this conference. I'm really glad that you all were able to participate in our breakout rooms, meet our amazing codeHER team, and have really important discussions about gender equality and social and economic independence for women. Once again, the WhatsApp group link is right in the chat box. And along with that, here is the link to just make sure that you have your attendance for this conference recorded, so we can continue to send information that way. Before we close this off, I would like to go ahead and highlight our amazing codeHER team members that were able to facilitate the discussions today. We have Carmel, who has recently joined us actually yesterday, and now today facilitated a great breakout room discussion. She's from the Manila in the Philippines and will be attending Stanford next year as a freshman. We have Manahil from Pakistan, who's currently studying engineering at an institute there. We have Emily, who is completed her master's in health from the University of Melbourne, I believe, and now is working for a healthcare company as a researcher. Lavanya, who is originally from India, but is a writer and a content director, right now based in California. We have Marissa, a wonderful addition to our team. Thank you so much for joining us. Marissa is relatively new compared to everyone else as well, but she's, a recent graduate, I believe, right, Marissa? Yeah, and has a full-time job and is still, helping us out with this. Srimati, a high school student from New Jersey, is here with us. So thank you all for, hosting these breakout rooms and being great facilitators. Okay, before we end this, I'm going to put again, this is the link to the Google form, and then this is the WhatsApp group link. So hopefully everyone here is able to join that. Before we close off, any words from the codeHER team or breakout room participants, anything that you all wanted to share, discuss, talk about before we end this, any closing remarks?
I just wanted to say, thank you so much to everyone for attending. I found the breakout room discussion super insightful and eye-opening, and I definitely have a better understanding of the pressures that exist in the Middle East and Africa. And I just thank you for sharing your stories, because I know for some people it's much more difficult than we sometimes understand. So just thank you so much, and I had a really great time.
Thank you for sharing that, Carmel. Anyone else want to go ahead from codeHER? Anyone from the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone that joined. It was really great listening to some amazing stories in my breakout room as well. Some of the girls, they shared a lot of their struggles and their experiences, and it was really great listening to those. And I hope we're able to continue such conferences and discussions in the future as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think we're going to close off in around a minute or two.
Sorry. Another topic would be interesting to discuss that you raised is health production rights and how it is managed in different communities. That's a good one too,
Absolutely. We'll definitely consider that for future conferences. Well, thank you again, everyone that's, still here with us, post our breakout rooms. Please join our WhatsApp group that's linked in the chat box. Looking forward to staying in contact with all of you, and everyone at codeHER is very grateful you all could attend and take part in our conversations today. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Wherever the world you're, coming in from, Nigeria, Cameroon, Uganda, Uzbekistan, we really do appreciate all of you. I mean, it's great to see this turnout and diversity of thought and perspective from all different countries around the world.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Sylvia.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Adama. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Hi, Justice.
Hi,
Thank you
everyone.
for sharing your story.
Bye, Justice. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Saniya. You did amazing.
Thank you, Justice. I really appreciate your support and for you being here and sharing your perspective in our discussions.
You're very welcome. Great job.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you so much for all your help and for helping us have this turnout as well.
You're very welcome. You're doing such a great job. So I want to continue
We
to.
really appreciate it. Have a
word.
great rest of your weekend.
Same to you. Bye.
Bye. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close our conversation. Feel free to reach out to us at info@codehergirls.org. I'm going to put that email here as well. And we will also be sending, our WhatsApp group chat links and the form to, say that you registered and attended this conference as well. You all will be receiving certificates of participation in this conference from codeHER. So thank you all for everything, and take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.